So I've been really busy in my last week of reading all the books for award-winning April, so I have 4 to talk about today. So come and join me in this video to find out what award-winning books I've been reading. Hi, welcome back to Bookish Bummy. My name's Mel and I like to review books. So today's video is where I'm going to review all of the final books that I read in award-winning April. So these are all the books that I've read in about the last, probably about week and a half, maybe to 2 weeks. So the last time I was speaking to you, I had started reading Half of the Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I had high hopes for this book because it was published in 2006, won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2007, and then won the Women's Prize for Fiction again in 2020 when the panel decided to have a look at all of the books that they'd awarded the award to in the last 25 years and said, okay, which book is now the best book out of these 25 books? And this one actually got that accolade. So that is really, really saying something. As I say, and gave me really, really high hopes when I went into this book. So I think last time I spoke to you about this book, I was just saying that it was talking about a political scenario that I didn't really know anything about. So yeah, this book is literary fiction, and it's set in the 1960s in Nigeria. Now, the British colonial rule ended on the 1st of October in 1960. So this is kind of set just before that kind of happens, and then in the decade after that has happened. And we're following 3 characters. And what I like about these 3 characters is they're all from completely different social backgrounds. So we have Ugwu, who is like a houseboy from a village, and he is sort of serving a guy called Odingbo, who is a university lecturer, but he's really invested in the revolution, and sort of a free Nigeria. And then after that, sort of then, because he is part of what's called the Igbo people, he's interested in kind of, you know, his own state in Nigeria, which does go on to become known as the state of Biafra. So we'll just come back to who the other characters are. So yeah, we're following Ugwu and Ugwu's point of view. We are also following a woman called Olana, who is Odingbu's girlfriend. So she is from more like the upper echelons of society. She comes from a really wealthy background, and her father seems to be some kind of government official, maybe a diplomat. I'm not entirely sure, but there seem to be a lot of army officers and sort of government personnel sort of around their house right at the beginning of the novel. And then the third character that we're following is a white British man called Richard, who has come to Nigeria, mainly I think into Lagos initially, to start teaching. And he falls in love with Alana's sister. So all of the 3 characters, the main characters that we're following, their lives all intersect with each other, and then there's other characters, you know, that are sort of linked to those characters that we're sort of finding out about their life through this decade period. So obviously we have the British rule has ended. We now have a free Nigeria from the 1st of October in 1960. But things obviously aren't smooth because the country has to get used to a state of post-colonialism. So, you know, there's a lot of critique in this book, quite rightly so, as well, about how, you know, that sort of rule had divided parts of Nigeria into certain factions. So you had the north, and then you kind of had the south, and then you had the Igbo people kind of in the east, as I understand it. And as the decade went on, the Igbo people in the east were sort of terrorized by other areas of Nigeria. So they then went on to establish their own country, which they called Biafra, and they stated their independence in 1967. And this caused a civil war between 1967 and 1970. So our characters are of Igbo descent, so we're sort of following, you know, what is happening just as the Brits pull out of Nigeria, and then how, you know, their political instability like the political instability and how it affects them and their daily lives, and how they basically have to go on the run, how it affects their relationships with, the people that they grew up with, or their colleagues. And then obviously they had political allegiances, or allegiances that could be seen as political throughout this time, and how they kind of had to reshape themselves in order to cope with the situation that was happening. And then obviously they are locked in the state of Biafra, and that is sort of the cause that they're fighting for. So this was a really, really insightful book. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. As I said, I got into this book, I didn't know anything about the history that it was talking about, or the politics that it was talking about. And it really got me thinking, actually, as I was reading this book, why don't I know any of this? And, in the British curriculum, I've got to be honest, like, we don't cover any African history when I was at school at all. From primary up until high school is never mentioned. And then I did history at college, and I don't ever remember there being any courses on African history. And then I studied history at university, and I don't really remember there being any courses on African history then either, which is interesting because I was studying modern history, and this would come under modern history. Although when I specialised, when I did my masters, I did look for a modern history degree that was mainly studying Eastern European studies, so that might be why there was no offerings for sort of African history there. There might obviously be at other universities, but I did feel when I was reading this book kind of ashamed that I didn't know more about this subject, that this subject had never really been introduced to me, never really been on my radar, and I kind of felt like I should have had more education on that going into this book. So I'm really, really glad I read this book, because it really opened my eyes, to studying a history of a part of the world that I really knew nothing about. And, it was absolutely brutal, that decade that is discussed in this book. And it was really, really upsetting to read some of the things that happened in there, but it was really, really well written. I mean, the prose was absolutely beautiful. The way that all the characters were written, they weren't all like perfect poster people for this revolution. The author has basically picked characters from different social backgrounds for us to follow, I think, so that we can kind of get an idea from each social background how war affected them. And neither are the characters perfect either. I mean, I really, really liked Ugwu, but he does commit an act in this story which really made me side-eye him. If anybody's read the book, then they will know which act I'm on about. But I'm not going to say it because I don't want to spoil it if you want to read it. But I really, really recommend reading this book. I thought it was completely worth the win that it had initially. And obviously I haven't read all of the 25 books since it initially won to know if this is the best one out of them, but it seemed like a worthwhile winner to me, like absolutely fantastic. I definitely am going to rate this a 5-star, and I would definitely read it again. And I've never read any of Chimamanda's previous work, to be honest. I'd never actually heard of this author before I came across this book, so I'm definitely going to try and lay my hands on some more of that. So that was, as I said, the third 5-star that we've had in award-winning April. So the next book I decided to move on to, I decided to move a little bit back into sci-fi. So if anybody's been here for a little bit, you all know I'm a bit of an Isaac Asimov fan. So I picked up The Gods Themselves by Isaac Asimov. I mean, Half of a Yellow Sun is quite a intense book. So sometimes when I had a really intense book like that, I like to try and pick up something that's a bit more light-hearted, just to sort of relax instead of going like straight into a really intense book again. And this one sort of does that. Like, I really enjoy Isaac Asimov's sense of humour, and he does have a sense of humour in this book as well. Wasn't quite as funny as Nightfall, but I still really enjoyed the way he did the characters in here. So this was published in 1972, and it won the Nebula Award in 1972 and then the Hugo Award in 1973. Now, we have already had a Hugo Award winner when I read Connie Willis's To Say Nothing of the Dog, whereas this one has won that award and the Nebula Award. Now, some of you might be wondering, like, what is the difference between the Nebula Award and a Hugo Award, because they're both given for the best science fiction novel in the last year. But the difference is that the Hugo Award is chosen by science fiction fans, and the Nebula Award is awarded by a panel of professional authors. So this one was chosen by the people and a professional panel, whereas Connie Willis's To Say Nothing About the Dog was picked by the fans. So yeah, this is the second sci-fi novel that we've had this month. I really enjoyed it. It's hard to describe this novel, but I'm going to give it a go. So there are 3 parts to this book. The first part is set in the year 2100, which actually isn't really that far away now, given this was written in 1972 and now we're in like 2026. Like, we're getting closer to that 2100. But yeah, it's set in 3 parts, and the first part is set on Earth in 2100, and they are discussing this scientific finding which basically connects Earth with a parallel universe. And the question really are, is this connection safe? And, you know, what are the ramifications of this connection? And, you know, there's a lot of politics involved, you know, with the people who want the resource from the parallel universe that they're connected to, you know, and at what cost, you know. And I feel that that's quite applicable to today. You know, the second part of the story is set in the parallel universe that the Earth is connected to, and we're following the beings, if you like, in that universe. But the best way I can describe it is basically this middle part is about these beings, aliens, if you like, sex life, but it's not called their sex life, and it's not, you know, it's not really gross and everything like the way that it's done. It's kind of done subtly and with a bit of humor, I think. And then the third part of the book is then set on the moon, because obviously Earth at this point sees itself as living on the moon, so there's a population on the moon, and it's how they view what's going on, like their relationship to Earth and this scientific discovery that they've got on Earth that connects them to the parallel universe. And obviously the people on the moon, you know, how are they involved in that? And what I find really interesting about this book, and it's really cleverly done, and considering it's done in 1972, as I say, it could be really applicable to things that are going on in the world today. This book discusses a lot, I think, one, about consent, you know, between, well, consent to have a child, consent for sex and stuff like that. I think we sort of get that in the middle of the book a fair bit. We're also talking about resources and the overuse of resources. There's obviously politics in there to do with that, but then also the politics to do with boundaries, you know, and how, you know, you might sort of put an embargo on people who are in certain districts compared to others. So again, I think we see that a lot in the world where, you know, you might have scientists who are allowed to do something in one country, but in another country they're not allowed to do it, or they're not allowed to research it. So I really felt that despite this being the oldest book out of all the ones I've read in award-winning April, it was very relevant to things that are happening in the world today. So, as I say, it's very difficult to give a full-on description of this book as to what the coherent story is. But all I would say is, if you like Isaac Asimov, this is not going to disappoint you, I don't think. It has a lot of science in it. There was a couple of times where I did have to go on the internet to research a couple of things, but a lot of the time I feel that the science is explained as you're going through it. So if you are a bit scared of sci-fi, I'm not going to lie, this is heavy on the science, and from what I've read, most of it is accurate. But a couple of things you can just Google, and a lot of it is sort of described in the book. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I think I'd give it a 4.5. Really enjoyable read, and I'm really glad I managed to fit some Isaac Asimov into this month. So after I read that one, I was then actually going to go on to what was going to be the final book of award-winning April, which was Margaret Atwood's The Testament. So this was written in 2019 and won the Booker Prize in 2019. And it is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, which was also written by Margaret Atwood back in the 80s. So I had read that book, I think in November or December, so I was really looking forward to reading the sequel to it. So the sequel is set 15 years after The Handmaid's Tale. And The Handmaid's Tale is set from the handmaid's point of view. So we learn about this world of Gilead, which is basically a terrible, terrible country, really, that has sort of, it seems to be set in America from what I can tell. So it seems that part of America has been factioned off and created into a state called Gilead. And within Gilead, women basically don't have any rights, and they are forced to breed and take up, specific subservient roles to men. Like, they're not even allowed to read. And handmaids are one of the roles that women get thrown into, and they don't even get to choose which role they have in this world. Like, it's chosen for them. So like, people who are handmaids are expected to breed for other women, and that is their full job. So The Handmaid's Tale is, the world of Gilead from the point of view of a handmaid. And that's what I'm going to say about that. I'm not really giving any spoilers for that, because obviously I'm not telling you specifically what happens to this handmaid in that tale or anything like that. So I did find that that novel I found a little bit frustrating at times. I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was a really clever story, but my main complaint with it was I didn't really like the way that it was written. It was a bit stilted, and I had to work hard to get through the novel. I think I wish that it had been written in a more light-hearted way. Whereas this duology, like this sequel to it, I feel was written in a far more easier. It was just far easier to read. Like, I felt that this kind of mirrored The Blind Assassin that I had read earlier this year for Style by Margaret Atwood. So obviously this has been written in 2019, which is like, I think, about 30 years after she wrote the original one, and I felt that this one flowed a lot better. It was a lot easier to read. However, I think that you will struggle to read this one if you haven't read The Handmaid's Tale. So this book is set from the point of view of the aunts. So the aunts are like another role in the Gilead society, and they are slightly elevated above the handmaids. So their job is to sort of watch over all of the other women and keep everybody in line, make sure that everybody is following, the religious, they're enforcing the religion basically on these women. So it's interesting now that we're following it from the arts perspective, because they have a wider view of the world than the handmaids, I would say, because they know more about what is going on at the higher levels of this society, and they have more access to talk to men who are in, higher positions of power. And they also have access to a library. Like, they are allowed to read, and they have access to all the notes that the aunts have been taking since the establishment of Gilead. So this might be another reason why I kind of enjoyed reading this one a little bit more, is I just felt like it was easier to get information about Gilead. And you're also not just in one person's point of view. So in The Handmaid's Tale, we're in Offred's point of view like the entire time, whereas in this one we're following like 3 different people who are 3 different ages going through this book. So for that, I did feel that I just enjoyed reading this one a lot more. But as I said, you would struggle, I think, to really get into this if you hadn't read The Handmaid's Tale, which is to be expected because this is a sequel. So yes, I really, really enjoyed this. Would I give it a 5? No, I don't think so. I think I would give this about a 4.25. As much as I enjoyed it, as I said, it's a sequel, so you don't have like the entire, information about what is actually happening in Gilead and just how bad it actually is without having read The Handmaid's Tale. So with that in mind, I did find it interesting that this won the Booker Prize in 2019. And this is a little bit why I'm late with this video, because this actually was a joint winner, I found out. It jointly won the Booker Prize in 2019 with Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other. And I was like, okay, I didn't really realise that you could have 2 winners for the Booker Prize. And apparently that's the first year and the only year that that's ever happened in 2019 was that they both won. And they were asked to split the financial award between the 2 of them. And this actually seems to have caused a lot of conversation online about whether or not that should happen. And interestingly as well, Bernardine Evaristo is the first black woman ever to win the Booker Prize. So it was a bit shocking that, the first year that a black woman had managed to do that, she then had to share the award with another writer. Now, Margaret Atwood has previously won the Booker Prize in the past with The Blind Assassin, which was an absolutely outstanding novel. It was like 5 stars. But that's a novel in its own right. It's not part of a duology, and it's not a sequel to anything. So, in all fairness, because I had read the Booker Prize, I then wanted to read the other winner for the 2019 Booker Prize, which was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. So I had not quite finished reading this. I still had about 100 pages to go. So I finished this late Friday night. What a book. This was an absolutely fantastic book. I didn't really know what to expect. As I said, I had not picked this up to read it because I had been drawn in by any reviews or had any knowledge really of what the book was about. I picked it up purely, to be fair, because I had read Margaret Atwood, I thought actually, because there is another winner here in this year, I should also read the other winner. And I'm really, really glad I picked this book up. Bernardine Evaristo is a completely new author to me, and I'd be really interested in actually reading some of her other books. And she had a very, very interesting style while she was writing this book. There's no quotation marks. There is only a full stop at the end of every chapter, and that's the way that she sort of laid out all of the text. Some people may struggle with that, but I actually thought the way that the text was laid out on the page made it fairly easy for me to work out actually who was saying what at the time. So I didn't really struggle with that, and I actually really, really liked it. So in this book, we are following, I think it's 12. We're following 12 different women, but it's split into chapters. So you have chapter 1 is going to follow 3 women, then chapter 2 is going to follow another 3 women, chapter 3 follows another 3 women, and then chapter 4 follows another 3 women. And then we have a final chapter which is called like the after party. So in each chapter where you've got a trio of women, those women are quite closely related to each other. So one might be the daughter, one might be the mother, and one might be, the best friend to the mother or the daughter. And then in the second chapter, you look like you've got 3 completely different women. So you might have a woman, and then you might have her girlfriend, and then, sort of the teacher who was involved in both of their lives. But gradually, as we unveil the stories behind these characters, we can see that they are actually all connected to each other in some way by the end of the book. So what this is doing, as I say, it's like a character study into each of these women's lives. And some of the women are obviously older, so their life, like they're talking about their life, so that might start from like the 50s maybe. And then some of the women are younger, so their lives starting in the 90s. And it's all set in Britain, so it's their lives in Britain and how they've developed. And all of the women in this book are black, or if they're not sort of black of African descent, they might be black of like from Barbados, or black American, or they are more of an Asian descent, but they're just not white. There's only one woman in this book who I would say is white. And that's what I really enjoyed about this book. So it's kind of like all of these women and their journeys as to how they came to be the person that they are in today's Britain, and what the generations before them had to go through for them to get to this point. So this book, with regards to like being a feminist read, this is definitely a feminist read. And feminism can often be accused of being feminism only from a white woman's point of view. So I think that this book really helps to fill in some of the gaps, I think, from minorities who are not white. So I think it's a really important read, and it's a really, really interesting read. I really liked a lot of the characters that were discussed in here, but equally there were some characters in here that I really, really didn't like for various reasons, just how they treated each other. But this book is, as I say, it's also talking about generations, like the generations of women in one family, and how they feel now that they're in Britain. Like they've either come to Britain looking for a better life, or they've been forced to come to Britain for whatever reason, or like they literally have been born in Britain, but so that they're second generation. And it's really interesting to hear culturally how they go about things, like for example the dating. So you've got your modern black woman here in Britain who may have been asked on a date by a white man, but then her grandparents are going to be really, really upset that she's not necessarily going to marry a man from Nigeria. So we're learning a lot about, as I say, the cultural background, depending on where these characters have originally come from as well, and like what is expected of them. And I found this book really, really refreshing, and I really enjoyed it. And I don't think I'm doing it enough justice when I'm talking about it. But because we're following 12 characters, and these are like character studies, there's not a specific overarching, plot point really to this. Nobody's in any danger or anything like that. We're just talking about how people's lives have unfolded. It would be really difficult for me to tell you all about all 12 of these characters. So I would just recommend it as a read. And I think that if you are interested in feminism, and you're also interested in cross-cultural conversations in feminism, so obviously looking at feminism from a black woman's point of view, if you are not a black woman, if you are a white woman like me, then this is a really, really, really helpful, insightful and enjoyable read. So this now brings up the question of, did both of these books deserve to win the Booker Prize? And when I went into this, I obviously read both because I wanted to answer that question. And I gotta be honest, like, I've never heard of Bernardine Evaristo. I have read a couple of Margaret Atwood books, and I do really enjoy her work. But I thought, well, surely the panel must have seen something in both of the books to make them both a joint winner. But my kind of feeling is, if you put an award out there, you should be able to define a winner out of them all. And I think that it kind of does a bit of a disservice to everybody involved if you don't. So I do wish the panel had chosen one as a winner. Personally, for me, having read both these books, I would give this one a 5-star. And I would have chosen this one out of these two books. Now, I can't say about the other books because I haven't read the other books that were in the 2019 shortlist. But my feeling is that this one should have been the overall winner. This is a complete novel in itself. You don't need to read anything else to understand what's happening in here. And I think that it's really important, although it's fictional, it's still based on very real things that happened to people, who settled in Britain or who are second generation in Britain. So I'm pretty sure like a lot of these things that actually happened did actually happen to people. So I think that this is again it's fiction sort of highlighting fact of things that happened, but it's obviously put into fictional characters. And I also thought this was really beautifully written. So yeah, to me, I feel that this one should have won the Women's Prize for Fiction. Now, yes, I have enjoyed this read, but my issue with this winning the Women's Prize for, not the Women's Prize for Fiction, sorry. This was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. It won the Booker Prize, sorry, but I do think we should have won the Booker Prize. And actually, I think also the fact that it got shortlisted into the Women's Prize for Fiction was a really, really good thing. I don't know who won in 2020, to be honest, so I can't really say whether this should have gone further or not, but I'm glad it did win an award. With this one though, what I'm trying to say is this is a sequel. This book is not full in itself without The Handmaid's Tale behind it, and Handmaid's Tale was like published in the 80s, and this one is obviously in 2019. And my feeling is that the Booker panel have awarded the duology, which I don't think is fair, because that book was written so long ago. I think that if you're going to award a series of books or a duology of books, maybe an individual, an award which is meant to go to one book is not the place to do it. I know that people can win lifetime achievement awards and things like that, and I really feel that for, you know, The Handmaid's Tale and, you know, the world, the state of Gilead that Margaret Atwood created is, you know, it's really important also to the feminist discussion, that dystopian world that she has created, because it really shows like how far it can go if women are disempowered from society. So I think that you know, what she's saying is really, really important. The point she's trying to get across is really, really important. But you don't get all of that in this book because this is a sequel. So therefore, I do not think that this should be the winner. The Handmaid's Tale, maybe yes, but that wasn't what was in the running to be awarded in the year of 2019, because obviously it had already passed publication quite a long time ago. So I feel that both of these are really, really strong feminist novels. Both of them are really, really, really good read. But yeah, I do think it should have been this one on its own, and that this one should have been part of a more general award about an author's contribution, you know, to literacy and literature in general. I think that Margaret Atwood is, she writes the feminist cause really, really well, and she has written over 20 novels, I think potentially over 30, I'm not sure, but I'm sure she has some kind of Lifetime Achievement Award coming to her, probably, if she hasn't already. I haven't really checked. But I do feel that this has usurped a little bit of the, you know, the top spot off of this book, and this book should have been just the only winner. And I think that Bernardine Evaristo should have enjoyed the entire prize pot, if I'm honest, by herself. So yeah, so those are the 4 books that I had to review today. I'm really interested in your comments with regards to what actually happened in 2019 and the fact that the Booker Prize did go between 2 authors and those 2 books. Have you read both of these books? What are your feelings on that? I'm pretty sure the internet would have already discussed this a long time ago. I'm obviously only coming into the conversation now, but I just wanted to give my opinion on that directly after having read both of these books. Let me know in the comments down below what you think, and also if you've read any of the books that I reviewed this week, let me know what you thought of them as well. So my next video is going to be obviously in May, so we're going to have a different prompt. So I'm just going to introduce that prompt now. In May, we're going to be doing K is May. So what that means is that I'm only going to read books by authors who have a forename or a surname that begins with K. And that is because I'm looking at my collection and K seems to be really, really popular. And this gives me the excuse to read a lot of Stephen King, a lot of Barbara Kingsolver, Kate Morton, Florence Knapp, the names I've been wanting to read for ages, so that's a K as well. I've also got some Kim Newman books that I want to get to. So yeah, there's loads of authors in my TBR list that have a surname or a forename beginning with K. And there's also a recent one that I bought called Homeseeking by Carissa Chen. That's also starting with K, so I really want to read that one as well. So I think K is May is going to be really, really, really good. Now, obviously, we started the month on a Friday, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my weekly reviews to a Friday. So that means that the next one we'll have is on Friday, and that will have given me a whole week's worth of reading in K is May. So I should have 1 or 2 books to review by then for you. I may occasionally post videos on a Monday of other topics that I want to discuss. So potentially, maybe not this Monday, but maybe the Monday after, you will have the full ratings list for everything that I read in award-winning April. Okay, so thank you for watching this video. I really enjoyed filming it. I really enjoyed reading all the books for it as well. And I hope to speak to you soon. Bye.